thank you for coming to the first official talk we are having here at the Gihanga Institute of Contemporary Art, focused on architecture, theater, and art. Thank you to our speakers for being here. Carole Karemera, we were doing this. I believe this is your first time here in Kigali. So Alex will be moderating the conversation. And a few words about the Gihanga Institute of Contemporary Art. For some of you, it's your first time here. We are a nonprofit institute of contemporary art focused on exhibition, performances, conversation, workshops, and we want to be a space for creativity, for knowledge transmission, and this is why this kind of conversation is really important to all of us. So I want to thank the speakers for being here, and to all of you. Thank you, Mr. Sandrine, for being here, for supporting. Thank you for, really being present and supportive for all the work that we're doing here. I want to share also a warm welcome to the ambassador of Qatar, who's here with us today, and to all of you, some of you coming from Nigeria, from Ghana. It's also your first time here in Rwanda, and we're very, very happy to have you all here. So this is a Rwandan art institution. We're also very Pan-African in our vision, so your presence is very appreciated. Thank you. And I'm going to pass the mic to Carole.
Good evening, everyone. First, thank you. I'm really grateful that we can co-host that conversation here at Gihanga Institute of Contemporary Art. It's a beautiful space to start the new year with. So my name is Carole Karemera. I'm not an architect. I'm not an engineer. I want to be clear about that because I know how sensitive it can be. A theater practitioner, and just a few words before I pass the mic to Alex from the School of Architecture. Here about the title about this conversation that we have co-written with Alex and Camille here. It's like, what? How could we talk about this? Is it culture, philosophy, and spaces, which is quite large? Because we also believe that the practice of artists, architects, and people involved in even urban planning and thinking about how human beings, we evolve in the same space, has to do also with philosophy. As a theater maker, we don't build concrete space. Most of them are invisible. So the structure that we try to create are invisible. We put people in a space. It's a world of ideas too, a bit like architect. But then from fiction, it goes to construction and, quite fixed place. But as a Rwandan artist, what I am interested in is how, and especially in this city, in this country, how do we now create concrete infrastructure that can really, how can I say that? Invite the entire world, the entire country, the entire city into a small space, like in using a microscope. You know that this small glass in the microscope is called a stage. So how do we stage the world in a small way? This is what we do as theater artists. And looking at the extremely small to talk about the extremely large or immense world that we are all inhabiting. So that's why we wanted to have you in the room. So we are extremely honored to have the cream of the architects in this room. It's a privilege to be able, as an artist, performing artist, to witness that conversation. So I will pass the mic to Alex, with whom we will all move around provocative questions and challenging opportunities, talking about that tonight. Thank you.
So I'm not sure anyone is expecting any provocative questions, but what I see in front of me is a book titled Common Sense. And a professor of mine used to argue that common sense is rare. So there is rare sense as well. So ladies and gentlemen, in this room, I see the whole world, all right? From the brief introduction, and that's fascinating. Everyone here represents a certain part of the world, either physically because of where they were born, or because of how they think. And I think the world is where you are, not where you're from. And that is critical. And that today's conversation, especially if you participate in it, will get you to take away something even richer. So if you're planning to keep quiet, make sure you write something down. And that we are in a very elegant space. If you've had a chance to walk around, the only way you can achieve spaces like this is if you value these kinds of conversations. Because that's where ideas emerge, that's where what people initially think is theory becomes even more practical and something that you can realize. So, ladies and gentlemen, initially I thought by moderating because I'm tall, I was just going to pass the mic around, but I'm going to make sure that we express ourselves, not on this side only, but on the other end. So we are going to have maybe 5 segments here. Andrew is going to set the stage. So he's going to help us understand, from his point of view, where ideas come from and how they can be realized, perhaps, from different perspectives. And then at the end, I'll come back to draw in a conversation from my 3 able, I don't know whether to call them panelists, because the origin of a panel, conversants, there you are, you know. And then we'll take it from there. And at one point, we'll draw you in. You know, we'll move to the end and you'll come to this side if you can fit, and then we'll carry the conversation forward. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy to be here. I'm an architect and a teacher. I prefer to call myself a teacher at the University of Rwanda of architecture. I think that's what I enjoy the most, that keeps me going. And I'm looking forward to this immersion. Thank you very much. Andrew.
Thank you very much indeed, Alex. It is an immense honor and privilege for me to be here. I'm going to stand up so I can see everybody. I am here with a purpose. I am here as an architect with a certain experience in biomaterials construction and also a certain knowledge of spaces for performing arts, which is the subject that Carole has asked me to help her look at in this context. And I sensed immediately that in order to be fit to answer this question, I had to open myself and receive as many impressions as possible of your country, your society, everything that's going on, things that will be, things that are just nascent, things that will happen in the future. And I've been here 5 days and just fizzing with the positive energy, the sense of possibility, the generosity and the kindness of this country. And I thank the country in general already for that. And it's extremely promising for the future of our investigations, I think, to start from a foundation like that. Now, my sort of journey is has different roots, obviously. And what I wanted to do in order to provoke a discussion and to try and myself understand better is to be as specific as I possibly can about myself and to share a part of my journey with you and some examples and some things which I think are being picked up and which are relevant here. It should be said, I'm going to sort of tell this as a metaphor here of a tree. You probably can't read the text on here, but yes. I can't, but I need to do the slides. Yeah, sure. Yeah, okay. So it's this is theatre. I can point as well. So I thought of I've been thinking in my work a lot about resources, about nature, about the things that we need to eat, to live, to make shelter, and I've been working about that. Common Sense was a book from nearly 10 years ago, which started unfolding some of those questions in terms of ecology and theatre space. And I took this sort of general sort of structure of a tree, showing sort of branching to different places with a timeline. And what I'd like to try and do is acknowledge it's my tree, but it's full of other people, and it wouldn't be my tree if it didn't have these people and these happenings in here, people like Bruno Latour, Donna Haraway, a certain Elizabeth. And I'm going to try and tell you the story down to the trunk. So in other words, backwards. And it has to be said, as an architect of a certain age, I'm kind of all over the place up in the branches. I'm growing in many ways that I don't understand and simultaneously. And I have to say, in the last 5 days, there's a huge new branch that's grown on here, which is relating to Rwanda. At the base of this trunk is the person who links me with Carole, who created our common interest, who is a theatre director called Peter Brook. I'll get to him at the end, as you might guess. But I want to actually try an exercise which Peter Brook taught me, which he frequently does in a lecture, which is an exercise in democracy. Now, the idea, if you're willing, the idea is that we will all, it only takes a minute, we will all stand up, and I'd like you to look around the room, and without saying anything to anybody, sense the people around you, and then decide collectively when you all sit down. Would you like to try that? You did very well. It's a very subtle exercise, and it's, from my standpoint, I've done this all over the world. It's very interesting to see in what different societies, and there was a sort of crescendo and a recognition, and you're all happy to share this achievement. So I think that's a very good indicator of the state of your society. Let's move on. Let's start moving through these slides here. I wanted to, so I'm going to sort of start, if you like, from, and I think this is fundamental, from the links between the stories which animate our lives, which can be very old stories, and the tools that we need. And I'm going to try and explain how through biomaterials, tools and stories, mythology and technology are perhaps more linked than we think. And I just wanted to acknowledge, this is someone I didn't know, but I felt close to him. He died 2 weeks ago today. This is Francis Salé, who's a French philosopher, who did crazy things like visiting the tropical rainforest in a zeppelin so that he wouldn't disturb any animals or people who were on the ground, and then pausing, and this is called the raft of the tree tops, and actually kind of pausing and briefly living at the top of the trees. Now, one thing that he did professionally, you can see it in this image here, was to actually draw the forest that you have in this part of the world in such a way that it wasn't thought of as just a resource or something to exploit or something to burn or to cut down to make soybeans, but something that's actually full of life and identities and diversity. Next. Now, this is something which has sort of positively infected my work. There's a few recent books. The Clearing, which is on the table here, please have a look at it, is about the culture of trees, and it actually touched on very much on my father, who was a botanist here, who died during the writing of the book. And then also, and this is really not so far from here, on the Mbuti and their capacity to live in synergy with the forest, and how the women were architects, and they're making these magnificent domes like Buckminster Fuller domes, and it's sort of moving on before the forest got tired. Next. This, you know, these kinds of stories, they come through Christianity, they come through Japanese animism, Shintoism, even in the current day. And then what I want to sort of lead you into is the idea that technique, so people who are very advanced in the use of timber, for example, which is a big subject in architecture, there's some link between this beautiful Austrian room and the question of plant consciousness and these Japanese people, you know, who are bringing spirits around to herald the new year. Next. Also Adam. So what I have been engaged in an almost sort of activist way is teaching these big Danish engineers who are from a big building company how they can go from zero to very far in terms of wood construction, because it's something that is necessary. They have very, very high carbon objectives in Denmark, but zero capacity and zero knowledge, really. So in a period of 5 years, we've actually, by meeting people all around the place, we can keep going, particularly in Austria and Switzerland. This is an amazing contemporary building by Herzog and Möhr, and this is an office building that we looked at as an exercise next. And then also things like this, you know, this sort of technical background. These are two, this is a wood building and a concrete building, same structural format, and they both have the same weight. So there are all sorts of other benefits to wood next, including carbon capture here, so in the green with the wood and in the red with the concrete building, just the structure. Obviously, concrete is not just consuming carbon, it's also polluting, it's stripping away sand, it's using water, it's causing problems with transportation. Next. And then wood itself is something where, you know, it's only structural wood. In other words, keeping the carbon is only about 20% of the use of wood in the world. So the question of how we enlarge that circle there is a big intellectual question for all sorts of people involved in this industry. Next. These are, if you like, the Umbuti of Austria. These are the leading intellectuals and producers in the world of wood who are now selling their products all around the world. I should emphasize that what characterizes their work is sharing, generosity, a kind of family atmosphere. That it's highly technical what they're doing, but they're all friends, basically, these people. And once you start talking about caring about the planet, and heaven knows there's an urgency for us to do so right now, you find that friendliness is not very far behind, friendliness and sharing. And it's a very big part of my approach to trying to help with the project here in Rwanda is to be open and receptive and also to be generous with my experience and my ideas. And over the course of really a few days, working with Carole and meeting people quite high up in industry, it's proven, I already know this is going to work, and it's going to be a very interesting process which is going to go both ways. I think actually in terms of stone construction, which we can move on to now, which is, we can skip the next two slides if you like. Next. Let's stop here. So contemporary stone construction, which is an emerging topic, is really being driven in the United Kingdom, is something which can be deployed here using the fantastic resources that you have here and existing machinery and know-how. And this is really just, this is a column. It's kind of like a kebab of stone, which is strengthened on both ends so that it has structural rigidity. And you can make prefabricated buildings almost the way you would make wooden buildings. It's obviously heavier, but it's more fire resistant. You don't have to worry in the same way about thermal and acoustic and fire resistance. So it's starting to produce, and we can keep going. It's starting to produce a fresh way. It's a very old material, obviously, but a fresh way of looking at how buildings are composed. Next. Including strange things like this, which has just recently appeared in London, which is a massive stone building. Next. And by the same architect, Amin Taha, a 12-story office building on Finchley Road, which is just completing this month. So it's interesting, this sort of mixture. You could sort of talk about antique thinking, you know, this goes way back, turning into, through technique, a way of looking at the future and also looking at the constraints that we have here in the present time. So this is part of, just to give this as an example, you know, we have already started working with producers on this topic here in Rwanda. I have a feeling that if we pursue that journey, I will be transferring that knowledge to Denmark, where I'm also working on the topic with them. So you see, we are all in this together. It is a microscope and a microcosm, and I think acknowledging that and actually celebrating our commonality, this kind of the common sense I was talking about in that book was really the sensing things together in a theatre, is both a joy and also, I think, a responsibility. Let's keep going. So I just want to tell you a little bit about where I'm from and share something about the process that I engaged in, and then we'll do a sort of quick focus on a couple of projects which were important in my life. This is, I live in Paris, but also in this small village in Burgundy. And I should add that, you know, as architects, I think if you're open and you're engaged in other things, you enrich yourself and you develop more capacity to actually do things in the right way. And this place, which is a historic ballroom, a site of a certain trauma because it was a site of a massacre at the end of the Second World War, which was abandoned. My wife and I took this over, and we transformed it, and we made it into a place that was possible to welcome many people. Keep going. It's also a place of making. It's a large place where I'm able to put together things like this facade and test them out before I might apply them in bigger projects. Next. It's also, in terms of gathering, and this is perhaps where we can reach out into philosophy a little bit, a place of encounter. You can see it's a bit small for you there, but this person here, and here working as a lighting technician, is the philosopher Bruno Latour. Now, Bruno is responsible, I think, on a global scale for a lot of the sense we have that for all of the great difficulties at this time, it's also an age of discovery. It's a period where we are learning to see the wonder of the world more intensely, with more concentration, with more energy. We're discovering species everywhere. We're discovering systems in nature that we hadn't thought were there because we've been, certainly in the West, we've been looking, through sort of the spectacles of rationalism. So Bruno is a really fun guy. You can sing with him. It's his wife Chantal Vincent-Després. His daughter Chloé Latour comes to Rwanda and collaborates with Carole. So that's another part of this sort of network. Bruno was a philosopher of the interconnectedness of things. Next. Next. Now, I live near Cluny, which is here in France. And just to, again, show the microcosmic character of the world, Cluny was the first city in France to erect a memorial to the 1994 genocide. And this is in part thanks to a celebrated Rwandan inhabitant, Sonia Rolland, who's an actress who was forced to flee and who grew up in Cluny. Now, Cluny is a funny place. It's the sort of center of Western thought in the 11th century. And now I'm going to start to show you a few projects. And this is a project which is kind of architectural, but also artistic direction, and also a project about memory. This is the Abbey of Cluny, which was the largest church in Christianity until the construction of the second St. Peter's, and it's almost entirely demolished. So next, and next. Now here you can see what's left of it. Next, and next. So basically what we're proposing to do with a group including very big staging companies, acousticians, and lighting engineers and what have you, is to reconstitute in a carbon fiber structure the missing part of this abbey, which is nearly 200 meters long, illuminate it such that it becomes a kind of a living monument, not a sentimental monument. Next. And then also using kind of emerging technology, reproduce the acoustic of the church. So someone could play a violin or sing, and standing inside the skeleton, you would hear the space as if it still existed. So it sort of brings the past alive and brings it closer without actually rebuilding it. Next. There's a couple of other things which are more along the lines of artistic direction. This is a scenography and performance I co-conceived about the evacuation of a city near Metz, actually, near Luxembourg. Next. And then a project that we're working on about ecology, which is about the disappearance of the Mer de Glace glacier in the center of France, which is an art project. It's a film project, basically. Next. Now, let's get into some wood structure stuff. There's a sequence of projects here which are all about wood structure. This is a performing arts facility which is co-conceived with a leading Swiss carpenter, which is modular. And the idea of this is that you can make a solid building with a solid wooden roof, with walls, with acoustic protection, as fast as putting up a circus tent. So it allows us to propose cultural infrastructure to be deployed very rapidly in places where they might not have any, or where they might not need it all year round. And also, if you go to the next slide, you can see that because of these modules, these sort of towers, we can compose it in different sizes and at different geometries. And what you can see here is something that we're doing this year for a literary festival in Geneva. Next. And then next. And then this will all go away and someone else will use it. It'll sort of enter a material flow. Next. This is another craft-based project, next, which is an acoustic chair. Now, as I said, I live in Burgundy, which is famous for its wine. And this man makes the barrels that we put the wine in, and he knows a lot about oak and how to bend it. And I had this idea for which I made a prototype for a listening chair, next. And he made these, which allow you to be 7 or 8 meters apart and really hear the voice of the person you're talking to be enveloped in their voice, basically, and also to hear your own voice. And we've been testing this out. This is Paris Design Week in public space and at the Grand Palais, and it's going into production now. Next. So you can actually put this in a noisy public space and still have an intimate conversation. It's much better than sitting inside a booth, I think. Next. And since this morning, where we had a meeting with a leading stone provider, we are encouraged by the possibility of producing these in stone here in Rwanda. So the wood ones rely on really particular handicraft, but the stone ones are made by sophisticated machinery, and as long as the machinery sort of speaks the same language, depending on where you get the stone, you can produce these just about anywhere, and obviously these ones can be used out of doors or in humid environments or in public space and what have you. Next. Now, I'm going to get into a short series of presentations about performing arts facilities. This is a project which started last year in the southwest of France for a theatre that's quite open to the landscape and incorporating plants and what have you, and a greenhouse. Next. This is the interior atmosphere of the auditorium with filtered natural light, which you can control. Next. And a very dense audience relationship to the stage. Next. A flexible auditorium as well. That's quite important to allow a range of uses. That's a key of sustainability.
Thanks, Andrew. So, ladies and gentlemen, I know half of you in this room, and I am aware that a lot of times we don't have these kinds of platforms where we have a real conversation about what we are all doing and how we can collaborate or even get whatever you're doing published at a higher level. So I'm going to prompt that discussion from our panelists here. Lise, because you're seated right next to Andrew, you're going to start by telling us what you're currently doing and how you'd like to, bridge these kinds of conversations through what you're doing. Lise, please.
Hello. Hi, everyone. My name is Lise Isaro. I'm an architect. I'd like to start by saying thank you to Kami and my fellow panelists for this opportunity, to share and exchange. I have an architectural studio called Ishyo Studio, and I am a curatorial coordinator for something called the Pan-African Architecture Biennale.
First one.
It's a first Pan-African Biennale, and essentially it's like, I would say it's either a platform or a space, or even if it's an event that mainly will be focusing on African voices. And what we're doing in art, architecture, and other medium sorts of expression. I think that's mainly it. I'm also a founder of something called African Female Architects, which is also a startup hub, or also a virtual magazine that features the works of African female architects on the continent. So I'm excited to be here. That's just, in it briefly, what I can say. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Lise. Christian, who are you? Please go ahead.
Thanks. Who am I? That's the work I'm working on now, to find out who I am. And when I know, I'm going to send you guys a WhatsApp message and let you know what I've discovered. On a day-to-day, I practice at Mass. I'm an architect by training. and I lead our studio here in Africa. And our portfolio covers the work on the continent of Africa, but also like in neighboring countries in Asia, if we have projects there. We also have studios in the US that covers continental America and projects in Europe when we do have them. So we split the portfolio that way. But the projects that I'm working on, I'm not going to speak to them through the buildings, because I believe buildings are a result of architectural process of creation, of space making and everything else. What I consider the core of my work is, I call it the next generation of African architects. And the simple definition for that is that I'm convinced that before we are allowed to practice architecture truly from our identity as Africans. I'm using the term African loosely here because I know also Africa is very diverse and it's different, and is that we will need to first have a conversation or find ways to curate the disconnect between our identity and the architecture the way we know and understand it now, from like, its theory, its history, its evolution, its capabilities in helping us be inspired, to inhabit spaces that are really unique to us, for a whole host of reasons that architecture has evolved, mainly excluding the voices of Africa and our identities and everything else. But also our lives are changing, and are changing in many ways that I don't think we fully understand. And therefore, I hope that my life career can start a movement that poses these questions, the next generation of African architects, so that they can then help bridge us these gaps, and hopefully, I don't know, in the next generation, we'll see the architecture that, does all of these things that everyone in this room aspires it to be able to do, and do it well.
Thank you very much. I think we can leave now. He has talked about everything. Carole, I want you to, grab the mic again, all right? And draw us back into your connection to, because we are 4 architects, right? Look at us.
I should leave the room.
And then on this side, we have, people in diplomacy, people in advocacy, people in government, even our spouses. I'm not talking about you. Young people, recent graduates from university in different disciplines. We have writers and publishers in the room, colleagues at the university. So what is your inspiration behind this? And we have had a lot of conversations about different things. What inspires you to be able to draw these different crowds, or these different people or disciplines for that matter? What inspires you?
I think it's first a big question about if we have to think about new infrastructure dedicated to culture on the continent. How do we undo some things that we know about the technicity of building, and how do we embrace where Rwanda is now? Many questions, a lot of questions. It's like if we have to think about concrete space in a country which is driven by green policies, how do we do that? Do we need interior to talk about the outside world, or do we invite the outside world in Rwanda? This is what we do. But what are the conditions that we're going to create for them to meet us where we are truly, culturally? So that's a conversation that I couldn't have without architects. The science behind the architecture here, I know that sometimes it was for years, decades, it's like architecture, is it a science or is it an art form? You're the bridge between many questions. And in terms of thinking about spaces, in a society like ours, I think we should have sociologists in the room too. It's like, how do we create space where everybody feels welcome in this city, when we can challenge policy, how we can stage politics, how do we can be more rethinking, or even the philosophy or cosmogony in the space the way that we think it could be. So I've loved to read more books published by Rwandan architects. I met some philosophers. They were quite challenging us performing artists to say like, but you know, the relation that we have with nature is completely different in the Rwandan history. So please bear in mind, if we have to think about the way that we convey people and the way that people are intervening and changing the sense of space in dance, in poetry, in Rwanda, could also help us to think about how contemporary architecture could look like. So I'm a bit a dreamer. So I guess we have a lot of dreamers in this room, where from you have to be creative to think about policies, to think about how do we locally source and not think about having a building made by the sand extract by Madagascar. I will have a real trouble to do that. But how do we create now spaces where Rwanda can think continuously and creatively using imagination where we are out at, but without fixing it forever? It's really a real question. I have, yeah. So I thought it was easy to think we are more clever together.
We are more clever together. Have you heard that? So I'm just going to do a small exercise before I draw this conversation back to Christian, Lise, and then back to Andrew, in that order. If you have a background in archaeology, you can stand up or raise your hand. If you have a background in archaeology. Anyone with a background in anthropology? Hi. All right. We'll come back to this. We have someone with a background in anthropology. Anyone with a background in theater? That is not Carole. All right? I'm not talking about people who love being theatrical. I can be. So we have 2 in the room. Anyone with a background in biology? Don't be shy. Anyone with a background in chemistry? Not the other chemistry. CH, you know. Anyone chemistry? Anyone with a background in literature? Ooh, look at that. Literature. Okay. Anyone with a background in anything else? So we can go down the list, but I just wanted to highlight anyone with background in programming or data analytics. Programming, okay. So I just wanted to bring those forward because they are critical. We don't discuss some of these disciplines enough because they are the ones that tend to help us understand the core of who we are and our impact, either on society or on the environment. And now bring it back to these guys who were picked for different excellent reasons. Christian, there's something about scale and then detail. We saw a number of slides here that emphasize scale and detail. How do you, through your work to date, navigate that reality, especially in this conversation around, what is really Rwandan, what could be Rwandan, and then your passion about transforming not people, but ways of thinking? The questions are going to be difficult. Look at the theme. Yes?
Yes. The question of scale through our work, I can approach that question from 2 angles. One, I think the misconception about scale associated with our work, and what I believe that is particular for the condition in Africa for us to think about scale differently. So the first part is that in our practice, and I'm sure many architects in this room will continue tell you about these things, when you come up with designs and buildings that you design and everything else, there's this question that can everyone do it? Or is it cheap enough for everyone to afford it? And I think architecture as a practice, as a professional practice, for some reason got distracted with that question. And we tried very hard to come up with the most efficient space, the most efficient materials, the most efficient detail, the most efficient or the most affordable material that we believe will bring more business, and because we are having more projects and everybody's trying to build the buildings or the systems that we've designed and built. That is a problem, though, because architecture as a creative form is not manufacturing. And I like to say this, people have put buildings together for millennia without architects. So I believe that architecture's role in society is not only to help people put buildings together. Like, we should put buildings together when we have found ways of stretching the innovation of what we're already doing, when we're improving lives, when you're adapting to the changes in our lives, in our society. I think that's a good role for architects. I'm not saying that we shouldn't leave out the practice of building buildings, because there's a whole host of reasons, like safety and all these sort of things, like liability, we're talking about policies and everything else. But that's one component of architecture. And unfortunately, you find that in emerging markets, like here in Rwanda and many countries in Africa, that part is overemphasized. And the innovation of architecture in trying to improve our space, our built environment, in ways that we continue progressing is minimized. And that gap is usually filled by academics that do the research, but it stays in books that are not published. If they're published, they're read by a small segment of our population. It's not consumed. I'm very happy we have this space where now we can have these conversations. And thank you so much. We'll have to host you for a dinner, the community of architects at some point. Glad you brought him up. So it's really important that we dedicate enough time to push innovation. Because for me, scale, the real scale in architecture disciplines come from pushing innovation and not from duplicating the same thing that we're doing. And to do that, it has to scale through ideas and has to scale through time. Investing in architecture excellence in Africa, I would say it's a must. Like, we really have to define what architecture excellence means here. Maybe, let me not use Africa, let me start with Rwanda. Here in Rwanda, what does architectural excellence looks like with the lives that we live? And then we have to, I don't know if we're going to encourage or if we're going to demand that young architects that are coming up really take this on and understand that their mission in life is to push that every single opportunity that they get. For me, that's the scale that I think is important. Now, to do that, we have to work in details. So that's why the details becomes important, like the material, how we put it together, how it fails, how we transform it, how we use it differently. That has to be at an intimate scale that allows people who are not architects, who haven't spent hours with us in studios. Architects work very hard. Like, they will stay in studios, sketching ideas, argue with engineers mostly, and then also argue with each other a lot about, there's like a, egos, wars happening in studios. Then we come up with something. But those things are important because people that are going to touch that wall or see that floor or see that ceiling, we're not part of those conversations. They don't know the decisions we've made. That's why details have to be defined and refined enough for people that were not purview of those conversations, maybe not to understand all of that conversation, but those details speak to them and say something about how this is different from what they're used to. Like any good art, I was chatting with His Excellency the Ambassador, and we were talking about how we don't understand art, but I understand that art is supposed to spark curiosity and innovation. You don't have to understand art. Similarly, like, you don't have to understand how that detail was put together, but it needs to speak to you and make you feel inspired, make you feel like you want to think different. You're in a different space. So that's how I relate scale and detail in the type of conversations that we're having.
Thanks, Christian. The reason why I was starting was not for you to stop. There's a breeze here. But yes, certainly is. So, ladies and gentlemen, scale, detail. So we have Lise in our midst, who is part of a team that is convening a Biennale. And these were... Okay, I don't know what to say. Please tell us about this initiative and how scale and detail manifest in this conversation.
All right. I was thinking, what am I going to say after what you say? In my understanding, and to complement what everybody has been saying so far, I think scale comes into how many problems or gaps you're feeling and solving through the lifetime of your practice.
Maybe to help,
yes.
We have this Biennale coming up.
Yes.
What would you like everyone to know about what it's going to expose us to?
Yes. So when I'm saying the gaps, that's one of the reason we created the Biennale, because not only does it bring a solution, but it reminds us to find solutions among ourselves through conversations, through dialogues, through research, because architecture as a practice has been an idea that was, I must say, also personally from my own experience, has been almost an idea that was created by someone else, but they never thought about an African person or Rwandese person like me. Through education, through the foundation of this, there are gaps in those systems of how architecture education is created, is shared. So when you start practicing, you don't find yourself, you've never heard of a woman in architecture, you've never seen a Black person create something that can inspire you. So I think we're the first generation of architects in this country, I believe. And so now we have to create solutions for ourselves and for the next generation. And thankfully Rwanda works well together with how we are practicing, because it's a country that is developing. So we are shaping of the country as it develops. Because yes, there's been quite a tragedy with the 1994 genocide against Tutsis. But we've lost beyond that, way before that, our identity. What inspires us? Who are we, to be honest? And you find ourselves coming into a practice straight out of school, because we've only heard what the West is doing. We've only learned from them. So now we're creating some type of, let me say, I don't know if I should say pedagogy or whatever, but we're creating new knowledge, new systems for ourselves, by ourselves. So I think that's where also the Biennale, the intent of the Biennale comes in, where the entire continent joins all 54 nations to speak the same language. We have these issues, we have climate change. How are we solving them by ourselves? Because we're not seeing it somewhere else. So we need to hear from each other, from ourselves, how we're doing it. So that's the intent of the Biennale, to bring diverse voices from the continent to shape the future of Africa. Yeah.
Thanks, Lise. So we are shortly we will transfer to you to ask questions shortly. But before we do that, I want to hear from Andrew, briefly. From your experience, what are some critical lessons that can be taken from Africa to elsewhere, be it to the West? What are those lessons that can be drawn from Africa? Because Lise says a lot of times through, in architecture school, every day we tend to look away. But what are those key lessons that can be drawn? Be it in architecture, be it in theater, be it in thinking generally.
It's a very complex subject for a brief answer, but I'll do my best. I want to give a kind of parallel answer, which is where I'm from in the rural area in Burgundy. We are suffering a great deal from climate change. And a lot of my friends who are winemakers are involved in very kind of violent and unpredictable weather conditions, and a lot of rain at some time, no rain at other times. What we have realized, certainly a group of them, is that agricultural practices involving synergy and collaboration between trees and other plants and vineyards are very valuable. And we arrogant Westerners, you know, some people are sort of walking around thinking about inventing something new, whereas a few wiser people in that area realize that there's hundreds, if not thousands of years of knowledge on that subject we can draw upon from Africa, that we are learning from you. We just have been looking through colonial goggles or economic goggles or rationalist goggles, and we just have not been paying attention to reality. So the first thing that we can do is open our eyes. I think there's a bigger and a broader picture in architecture, which was revealed partly by the Versailles Biennale this year, which is we have gone mad on fuel over the last 100 years or so, and we have this false impression that you know, there are no planetary limits, that we can just adapt ourselves infinitely to our climates. This is a Latourian, you know, idea of being hors sol, being off the world, not having your feet on the ground. Now, if you look at the best examples today, many of which were drawn on in this Biennale in Versailles, where, you know, we now have this, we've awoken from our madness, from our fever dream. We're learning from you. We're learning from cultures where there had never really has been excess energy, there haven't been excess resources, and people have been living in a very sensitive and rooted way with their environment. And it's actually, you know, there's a lot of knowledge about passive cooling, about working with natural ventilation. This is a project that we did with natural ventilation, which is probably a too complex way here. So I think that the subjects are myriad, and I think that what we should do is come and see your Biennale.
Thank you, Andrew. So, ladies and gentlemen, questions, comments, and we, you know, let's move the discussion to this end.
Hi, firstly, my name is Jimmy. Second time in Kigali, and came here, fell in love with the people first, then fell in love with the place, and in under 1 month I've been back twice. So I love this, Cami. Thanks for sending the invite and putting this together. But I was hoping you would have started this premise of this conversation with the definition, at least, or an attempt at that definition of what is African architecture. Because, and I love what you said, Andrew, about concrete buildings and all the other stuff. We have imported those ideas from the West so that even when it makes no climate sense, we often build with concrete. Even when we knew that mud buildings, brick buildings, kept us all much cooler in a hot climate. And now there is a sense that the idea of what African architecture means is lost to us. So I'm excited that you are doing what you're doing, because perhaps we can go back and draw from some of those, because the West is now looking to African architecture, which seems to have been decimated in most places, for the very things we knew about years ago, centuries ago, about how to live in harmony with our environment. So I would love to hear what that looks like here. I'm seeing lots of beautiful spaces. I'm seeing lots of great venues, but oftentimes not incorporating some of the things that I know work for Africa. So what does that look like for you?
It's a very clear question. So I'm inviting another hand to take this mic.
I hope those are questions for everybody.
Actually, I want to build on what my friend was talking about. By the way, a very good question. It sparked a thought about how architect, between all the sectors of knowledge humans have, had been affected mostly by globalization, where historically there is an identity in the architectural buildings you see everywhere. In Japan, the Shinto temples, you see them with woods and no nails. In Yemen, they use certain type of clay for the ventilation you were talking about. They use it to cool the hot air. The Persians with the pigmentation of stones and murals and whatnot. Do you think now, going on what my friend said over here, is that since it's been so long, people understood that the way to build things is in a certain way, concrete and whatnot, and kind of forgot the traditional way of building, where the local architects at that time decided to use the local materials to adapt to the weather they're in, the climate they're in. Is it practical now to build on old knowledge and start catching up? Can they catch up or not? Or would it be something unique and more expensive, even though it shouldn't? Like if you build a building now without any nails, it's going to be way too expensive because it's unique. Okay.
Okay, I'm going to take one more. So there are two questions. One about what is really African. Yep. So just to make sure you remember the questions. One is what is African, right? The other is what will it take, right, to revive some of these long-lost traditions of building. Yes, sir.
My name's Emery Karenzi. I'm an architect as well. I mean, since this is an exchange or a conversation, we can kind of address some of those points. There is this approach we have in architecture. Whenever you're starting a project, and let's say you're a national architect, you tend to look into something called vernacular intelligence, meaning there is an area where you're going to design and build, but also what do you have to learn from that area and the culture there. And what that tends to inform goes beyond just materials. It's the program. It's the way of life, really. In this context, if we're speaking of performance, what does it mean to use that word performance in Iranian culture, for example? What can we learn from that? So going back to that question, when we're saying what is the African architecture, it goes beyond just being able to identify that one element. It becomes more of like a formula with variables and constant. And then you tend to identify those variables, and then you really have to play with it until you can adapt your ideas or new ideas to the culture or to the locality that you're designing for. Another thing, going back to the scale, we have another idea about the spatial hierarchy. And that kind of addresses either the compression or expansion of spaces and what that has to say about the program or about the comfort or about the story that the space itself is telling. Or I'm forgetting the actual technical word, maybe the architects in the room can remind me, but the idea that a space has a soul or a space has a spirit. And it's up to architects who understand the scale and the way that space has to be occupied to really address that spirit. So we can talk about these ideas with the understanding that they change according to the location, to the culture, but also to the program. Because back then you use, even when we're talking about let's use the general idea as a hut. You have the center of it, depending on which culture you're talking about. The idea of coming together in a circle is an idea that you find in almost every culture across Africa. But that also changes depending on whether you're talking about the storytelling, are you talking about coming together to address an issue in a family or a culture? Are you talking about coming together to share a meal? So all of that changes according to the culture, but according also to the people and to the program you're serving. So I don't know if that adds more layers to the conversation, but thank you.
So far, I have at least 3 people who are going to be part of the panel next time. Quite rich contributions, right? So I'm going to draw it back here, and then we'll come back. And when it got there, the question changed. All right? The most Christian guy here. Okay, Christian, go ahead. What is Africa?
No, I think Emery responded to it. I think he clarified the question, and I appreciate the way he said it. Like, you cannot be picking pieces of the process, the inspiration, and everything else, and call it the identity. The identity is bigger. And let me try to answer the first question provocatively. If someone asked me what African architecture is, I tell them, you're looking at it. It is here. It's what we see. That's what we've done. And now the question for me that I feel like maybe we should be discussing is, why is it like this? Why is it confusing? And the reason for that is because architecture is a language of translation. We translate ideals, we translate aspirations, we translate needs, we translate culture, we translate all of these things that constitute our identity into physical form. And we don't need any other proof that we need to do this deep work to define what is contextual or specific to our place. We can call it Africa or Rwanda or whatever country is here, because it's very evident it's not working for us. And then you can go back to those things that constitute our identity. Where do we place value? Right now, our architecture looks like this because of where we chose to place value. If we placed our value somewhere else, our architecture will change automatically. We will not even need to force it because it will follow that value. So the values of a system are very important. You can ask many Rwandans here, what are your cultural values? We can give you 10 answers and they will all be very different, right? It's not abnormal because you might come from different backgrounds and everything else. But what gets at the core of it, or what ties everything together, in my opinion, is what gives true basis for creation. And when that is not harmonized, then we get the confusion that we get. So for me, the question of African architecture starts from asking, what is African, or Rwandan architecture? What is Rwandan? What are the values of being Rwandese? And how can we translate that into spaces? I've given people, we've had this conversation before, very simple examples. We architects have grown to be comfortable with the idea that if someone brings a commission to me and they want to design a maternity center, they have a budget of $10,000. That my job is to figure out how to build a maternity health center or center within that budget, have walls, have windows, have whatever it is. And then I disconnect myself completely from the process of giving birth. I'm a father. Me and my wife went through that process of giving birth. I know what I liked through that process. I know what I didn't like. But for some reason, when I sit on my desk, I forget all of that, and then I just draw lines. Oh, we have to have this room here, it's rectangle, it has a door here. So I'm just thinking about efficiency. Oh, this window is too big, we will not be able to build it. Or we can build, but it will be very expensive. We value engineer it to reduce the window and everything else. And then at the end, I have a project that I've designed, and we built, cut the ribbon, celebrated. But I cannot go there with my wife when she's going to give birth. Because I think, no, that's not for me. I have to go to that one. And when I had the opportunity to even question and say, okay, I don't have an unlimited budget, but what can I do to improve that process for, I don't know how many mothers that are going to go through this space? For some reason, we built a buffer between our practice and questioning that. I give that example because we will always continue to fail or produce confusing architecture if we don't encourage architects to really question the problem we're solving in our society, or what values in our societies we are building to. I had an interesting conversation with Dorothy Rugamba, who's also like a prominent artist from here. He lives in France. And he was talking about how in the performance art, they're limited by how creative they can be, because when they get to the space, the architecture is already predefined. So it's like you already have 4 walls, and basically you're limited. The bandwidth of your creation is already confined. And sometimes we say you get creative around something. We post-rationalize these type of things. But when we had a very long walk, and we geeked a lot about arts and architecture and everything else. And we got to when you question that, it's not just about walls. Of course, it's normal to innovate around constraints. We all live within constraints. But we're talking, for instance, about Intore troops. It's a dance, it's a traditional dance in Rwanda. It has a number. There's a number that has to be filled. So we need to, as a Rwandese person, I would want to know, what is the right number that makes a full troop? And then I would want to understand, when they dance, what type of moves do they do, so that determines the standard of stages of performance here in Rwanda. So that when we design a performance space, we're not saying let me go look in the book on the internet and see stages, how they designed, what the standards, what the sizes. No. Rwandan, if you want to design a space for performance, and it includes traditional dance, there is a standard that is inspired by that formation, the movements they do, how far they go, we need to design the spaces according to that. And we talked about the floors. Intore dancers dance with bare foot, and it has to be on compressed ground, because the sound is vastly different when they wear sandals and they're dancing on concrete or tiles. It's very, very different. Even the performance of the dancers is affected by such small thing that when I'm talking with the client, like Carole, will say this is expensive, so let's replace it with a tile. We raise a line in the Excel spreadsheet, and then we put a new material. It's a very quick decision, but affects a lot. So I think I've said too much.
No.
Last few things. No. I get carried away. I get carried away.
I really like the example that you're sharing, because, the question, what is Africa? No, what is English or, French, can be very philosophical. The question then becomes, what is practical? As you philosophize, what is practical? And you will discover from the example that Christian has shared that there's a lot that we can draw from culture and ways of being, ways of thinking, ways of doing.
Western theatre of the last 50 years. He had the first 25 years of his career with great glory on the great stages of New York, Paris, and London. At a certain point, he got fed up. He realized there was something missing. And as part of a long process of putting himself into question, he came to Africa. And he carried out a series of experiments. And what he actually said, and you put your finger on it, resonates beautifully, is performing. In this case, he went from Algeria through to West Africa, all the way through the Sahara, showing up in villages and unrolling a carpet, basically, the blue carpet you see here, and starting to improvise or tell stories. It was a kind of sociological experiment to see people who are different, can they communicate? Are there these sort of fundamental stories that can be transmitted or not? And most of the time it failed. Now, what he told me as part of the book that we did together was really practical and really spatial. He said that the one thing you most need to capture people's attention is a wall. Everybody needs a background. You need to be able to detach yourself. You also need to send the sound back to people. You also need a floor. It can be a very simple floor. And you want to have that floor on the same level for everybody. You want to have a democracy where there's the possibility that the worlds can meet, that interaction can take place, whereas in all the stages he'd been working on for his career, there was a power relationship because the actors are higher than the audience. Now, he translated this particular investigation into all kinds of spaces all around the world in a very low carbon manner. This is Brooklyn, Avignon, quarry, the quarry space that he recuperated. And I think it sort of speaks to what we were saying earlier, that the essentials in life, you know, the most conducive conditions are actually universal. Now, he found them here, not far from here, and I think it's very interesting to bear that in mind with our constrained resources, that you know, we can learn from the simplicity of the conclusion of a great artist to examine these things, because it really is fundamentally architectural.
All right, great. Yeah. We are slowly trying to answer that question. Where did things get lost along the way? I don't know whether anyone in the audience wants to take that question, or at least you want to try, or you want someone in the audience. Where do you think things got lost along the way, and we are trying to claim to rediscover them? Anybody? Everybody? Somebody? Yeah. Lise, you want to give it a try? You want? Yeah. You asking for the mic? I'm kidding. So go ahead.
Again, I think what we lost touch is how we. It's all, again, those gaps that, again, I feel like we are trying to resolve through the Biennale, and through conversations like this. But I think it's history. Look at our timeline, all the way to 1900s. There's what happened to the continent of Africa, slavery, colonialism. That in itself is one of the reasons I believe we've lost touch to our roots and our identity, and pride as well, because what colonialism did, besides, you know, telling us this is not the best, you know, your madhouse is not the best construction method there is there. I think it's also the system that were put in place, from policies. I think you touched on it, Carole. Policies or a lot of things, you know, changing our identity, creating tribes that weren't there, all these sorts of things that bring separation and division among Africans, borders, you know. So I think that in itself is one of the main reasons. History, looking at history can tell you this is how far we got lost, you know. And going back to understand, okay, so what were we doing then to celebrate what we were doing that wasn't celebrated by, you know, colonialists and stuff like that, is okay, we have this, we have heritage, but again, there's so much that was lost that we can't recover. I've seen Benin and Nigeria having this new museum, MOA, I think, Museum of Modern Art of Western Art or something. What is it called? Museum of West Africa. West African art. So that's West Africa. We don't know East Africa in there. Like, we have no history on the heritage of, you know, lost artifacts. It's completely lost. We don't know where it's at. I've seen one of the artists here, Dolph Banza, was invited to work on, I think, with Hamburg Museum, and he showed us some, how do you call it? What's the top of Ichansi? It's some type of artifact. I may call it like that, but we never saw it before. But he saw it, and it's in Germany. It's not stored anywhere. The history of the land, the history of nature, the trees. We don't know. All these plants, we have them in some weird Latin words and names. So we don't know the names here. We have no archive whatsoever of this thing. So that's the first thing to do: research and recover our own identity, our own ways of expressing language, practices, and things like that. But then when it comes to to recovering when it comes to traditional methods of construction, if that's what we're looking at. I think everything we used to do as well was probably based on efficiency and inspired maybe by nature, or before, the fourth industrial revolution. This is just my thoughts. So what would that look like today? I think even then they were inspired by something. Was it by nature? Or we can be inspired by the works that we can see then, I think that's a way to like look back, learn some of the practices that we've called the right practice, and establish a new language. That's my thoughts.
Yep. So let me take it back to the audience. Yes, I see hands up. And all right, please.
Thank you so much, and thank you to the panelists for all the points raised. Allow me to also get up. I just wanted to come back on the point of Lise about the archives and everything. So a few months ago, we actually received at the ministry Sankara Mutoni, who described himself as an artist, but he actually studied architecture. So his book is called Traditional Architecture of Rwanda, and he's centering around the traditional houses that we had. Now, with the process of colonization, he went to different museums. He's based in Belgium. He went to the Museum of Tervuren, where the archives on Rwanda and actually Belgian, Congo, Burundi, like it used to be called, is very extensive. So from his time at the museum actually came a lot of questions about how we used to build, why everything had to be changed. So through his book that's actually available now on the market, you can actually learn about how architecture had to make sense with the culture that we had as people who owned cows, as people who lived in community. So I think when it comes to archives, yes, we have what we call today modern archives that are being hosted in different countries than ours through colonization for very specific reasons, where we were taught that what we had no value, yet they found the value in hosting it in their countries. Please explain to me the irony behind it. So today when we're talking about, especially to our young people, be interested in your history, be interested in who you were before somebody came and told you you were less than. I think there is value in talking to the elders. We don't consider them as archives, but they are archives. They have traditional knowledge that no books, can really give justice to. So I don't know when your Biennale will be, but we would love to be part of it. And I think as part of the conversation, let's also make room for, yes, the people who are in these institutions where they study architecture in and no offense here, in a Western manner, but let's have the conversation with people who lived the architecture, who actually the one feeding us this information that we lost through different processes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes?
Good evening, everybody. My name is Deborah. I am currently crafting my background in one of the other industries. So that is also to say I'm a student. So I feel like I'm going to challenge everything that has been said prior to this. And so where did we get lost as Africans? I would say that we are not experimenting enough, or at least not fast enough. And when it comes to how fast we're doing it, I think that while we're here, like we're saying that we're trying to bridge the gap by creating conversations and all. But one thing I've noticed about artists is that we act and feel exclusive. It's like, oh, we're kind of different from you, so let's gather together and gather inspiration and we'll get back to you. But while we're waiting, there are people who are creating Dubai in Zanzibar, okay? So like for me as a young person, that is my aspiration. So now my question to you is, how are we trying to quicken inspiration so that we influence the young people, right? I'm in a TikTok age, I'm Gen Z. How are we going to do it fast enough? Yeah.
I think I saw a hand up. Are you answering the question? Okay, there you are. Anyone else raising their hand for someone else?
Yeah, thanks for this beautiful conversation. I would just like to ask Carole a brief question, considering that we also talked about theater and cultural spaces, and also together with Ms. Sandrine, it has been acknowledged that these spaces are needed and are wished for in the future, and multiple actors within the cultural and artistic spaces are thinking a lot about these future spaces. So maybe also taking this conversation a bit into the future, the outlook and the potential that is there. What kind of spaces are envisioned at the moment? What do you envision and what is needed, considering that there is a need for a wall and a floor, but it doesn't necessarily have to look like those theaters from Europe, right? So what can they look like, and what do you think is needed at this point?
Thank you for a wonderful conversation. My name is Shayo. Just a couple of, one is just a comment. I think totally agree with everyone on the importance of heritage and the past. I think one thing that I would also bring into the conversation is one of imagined futures. I think at some point you need history is a very interesting thing. And imagined futures, I think, gives us the opportunity to solve problems as they are for us today. So that's just one thing I wanted to put in. And then the second was our students' wonderful question. I completely agree. I think there was mention of innovation, and I think the very simplified infrastructure of innovation is ideas and hypotheses, experiments, feedback loops, some sort of conclusions or standards, right? I think we're not short of ideas. I think we're certainly short of experiments and quick experiments. And then I think to the TikTok Gen Z conversation, there's a feedback loop of how we communicate what we are learning to in a multidisciplinary world, but also to people that are not necessarily in the academic or artistic endeavors, who often actually become the people that carry ideas through. So I think I'm interested in people's thoughts on how communication around what people are learning, around their hypotheses, what experiments are actually happening that we probably don't know about. The Biennale is going to be wonderful. How do the ideas in those rooms reach people who might not be in the room, but may have something to offer? And then lastly, from a standards perspective, this is a much larger question, but I think we haven't really spoken about the role of institutions and our, whether it's our business institutions, our political institutions, whatever it may be. We can have as many hypotheses as we want, we can have as many conclusions as we want. If there is not a top-down, actually, as much as we don't like it, institution to set a standard, such as the size of a stage, what does it really end up meaning, apart from something we believe to be true? And I think that also speaks to the history stuff, the heritage stuff. At the end of the day, there is a need for a consensus. And where does that come from? I don't know. But that was my question. That was your question.
So to everybody, while we engage in the conversation, the question to you is, what will you go away with that you're going to demand in your space, or apply for that matter? I'm interested in what your thoughts are. What are you going to demand because of this session, or apply wherever you go, or wherever you're based, or what you do? I'll be back, those whose hands were up. I just want to see whether anybody has any reflections on the question on experimentation and thinking, and the contribution of how we think, what we think, how we reimagine things. And then the third bit is on the role of institutions. So policy, not policing, but policy, and its role, and how that can shape the innovation we're talking about. So I'm bringing it back here if you have any thoughts, but Carole, please, go first.
No, just to pick a few things, because you're asking what we will go home with. What I do miss a lot, and I was sad when they closed, is the School of Philosophy. I think it should be attached to the School of Architecture, or to any school. Because as a storytelling, I miss a lot, not the classical memory, but how philosophy is connecting all the different disciplines together. And when we want to have any conversation about, I don't know, nature or anything in Rwanda, I have to call one philosopher organized that is coming to Kigali for 2-3 days, having conversations with artists to pick the brain just to feed our practice. And they have so much to share. From a place which is not practical, which is so rich for us, because after we remain completely free in our practice because we received also the freedom to think from them. It's a bit like, so that's something that even in the question of the memory lost, when we worked on arts and memory, we had a lot of discussion with them saying that memory as one word in English, Kinyarwanda 7, because we learn things differently. So for us, art is open space to create, to engage with the Rwandan population, having deeply in the DNA what memory is for each of us. And the same for climate. When we talk about environment, we talked with philosophers and they say there is no ecology environment word because nature and human being are not dissociated. And they went through explaining into the Kinyarwanda language, how it's there everywhere, why the way we speak, it's dictated and by nature. And then we translate that into music, because after we just discovered a way that even the Rwandan music, because I'm a musician too, the way that the polyphony is organized has to do with the nature, with the hills, the way that we sing. So if we want to make people travel through music in Rwanda, then you have to remember that music composition, tones, the rhythm, everything is linked to the way that people were speaking from one hill to another. So the way that we teach music, I was taught classical music, jazz music in Europe before to understand that in Rwanda, and then having young musicians knowing it by heart, in their bones, that knowledge. And then how do you activate that knowledge which is there, but not consciously there, or not written in a way that everybody could read it, codified. But I like the fact that sometimes when we think about knowledge transfer, some knowledge sometimes could only take place in some spaces. So I understand that sharing is important, but sometimes you can only learn from the place where the knowledge has erupted. And that's something that I think us as thinking in this room, how do we make sure that knowledge is listened to like the volcano, and then we are ready to just celebrate it what it is and not extracting it to make it available. It's also a big question in doing a space now. In Rwanda, I was just like, okay, theater where? Theater in school, theater in bars, theaters in public space. And when I wanted to do street theater, I had to say, okay, but the streets in Rwanda, how do you do public art? But the streets recently were the theater of the murder, so you can't ignore recent history, but you have to go back to say like how public space were organized from the top of the hill till even the lake, how the mobility was organized for the kids, for the women, for the cows, for everyone to feel comfortable. So it's a lot of questions, but I think the imagination for me, because I'm a performing artist, is just through rehearsals. How can we have space to rehearse the futures? I think this is the only time when you repeat it, in the process of repetition, you find questions. Why do you do this? How and where is that coming from? Is it mechanical? Is it taught? And how, if you deviate from one note or one movement, you open a new space for new limitation to be removed. So I think in terms of space in Rwanda, I think what I do dream about, now it's a bit like how can I say, you have a baby, nobody can see it, but slowly it will grow. It's to have a space where you can rehearse future, when you can experiment, where the space is also part as the experimentation. So it's really difficult to think about that, because you have to think about floor. I remember the first conversation that we had with students to design a space. We said like, okay, let's take musician. Let me explain you how my practice is with dancers. And many of them were like, what are you talking about? So it's really a place when we can experiment, be a real lab. I don't know where you do in architecture places, you have your studios, but we have worked with some young visual artists here to design theater decor, yeah? And the question was like, okay, this is 2 storylines. Go outside and see how the storylines resonate in the city. And they came up with more brilliant idea than any set designers educated in New York. Because the way that they observe, the way that they experiment the city, the way that they know the material, everyday life from, I don't know, anything was really deeply understood and involved. And the way that they start designing, we had like 15 projects based on 2 sentences and so well rooted in the Rwandan reality and culture that we had to choose. It was really hard. But I think we need space like that when we can really experiment in miniature, because this is also what you do. Like that we can, test, and then when we can fail, and then try again, and then fail in small, and then to scale it up after. Like that we won't have to cut too much budget when we get to the resize. But I think we need to rehearse and experiment.
Yeah, great. So, just as a bridge, the other day, I have a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old boy. The girl is 4, the boy is 6. So they are praying, and the girl asks for her turn, and then she says a number of things, and she says, God, please help me to be less naughty. Okay? I promise I'm not going to be naughty. But anyway, moving on, a day later, you know, she's being naughty, and the elder brother reminds her, Cheza, you prayed yesterday that God helps you to stop being naughty. What's going on? She looks at him and says, God hasn't yet done it. So I'm just trying to let you know that we don't have to philosophize. Once in a while, for us to be inspired, we need to be childlike. Christian, please.
I assume these are going to be my closing thoughts because we've kept everyone here. And the 2 things that kept coming in my head as we were speaking. And the first one I'm going to use as an example about how we can understand architecture and space making fundamentally differently. And the second one I will use it to relate to what you're talking about is about how the compartmentalization of art and their role in our lives is actually doing us a disservice. So the first part of it is, and I'm glad Lise mentioned the museums that are being created in Africa. And I think someone mentioned about the role of institutions. We really need to understand the institutions we are creating and for what purpose. And I'm going to be very controversial here. Someone will have to convince me that building a museum in Africa for the returned stolen objects is a good idea. I still don't understand it. I don't know why we do it. It makes no sense to me. And I'm going to explain myself. Just give me a few minutes. Because I've had this conversation with people we work with, they know I'm very provocative. I like to ask really questions of like, what are we doing? So let's take a scenario. Real conversation we've had with people. There was a community in what is now Cameroon. Germans went there in 1913, I don't remember when. They took a goddess from that community. It was a goddess. It was a symbolism of what their faith and their aspirations and their values was. That object was not art. It became art when it was traded to whatever institution it went to in the US, or in Europe or whatever it is. So if we really care about the returning of those objects, then you have to question the purpose of returning it. Are we really against it being an art there and want it to be art here, or do we want actually to restore some of its function when it was there? And in addition to that, when talking about details, the reason why someone who came from hundreds and thousands of kilometers away saw it and saw beauty and value in it is because of how artistically and craft was well done. So we lived in a time where that craft and arts were coming together to serve a purpose that was morally valuable in that society, to reduce an entire object that is an ecosystem of artists and thinking and philosophicking and everything else to just like an object, an art.